welcome to another episode of Jenny's Chateau farm. Today I actually have quite a busy day of all kinds of errands and jobs that I need to do, and I'm going to bring you along with me. And while we do them, I would like to discuss with you something that's been on my mind, particularly since we read all those wonderful comments from you on our episode 12, where we shared with you some of our house hunting experiences. What I want to discuss is the term chateau. What exactly is a chateau? Because it seems to me that for many of us, our own definition of what a chateau is does not match what the French definition of a chateau is, what the technical definition is, and what the estate agents might call a chateau. To many of us non-native French people, we would tend to think that any large old house in France must be a chateau, but this is simply not the case. So the point is, if you are house hunting in France and the only search term you are using is chateau, then you could be missing out on a huge number of beautiful, vast, old houses in France that are not chateaus. Because here in France, there are many different words used to describe large old houses in France that to you and me may look like a chateau from the outside, but in fact they are not. So that's what I'll be discussing today. What are some of the search terms you could be using to find your ideal home in France? The other things I need to do today are I need to pay my tax bill. And for the life of me, I cannot figure out how to log in and pay it online. So the easiest thing to do is just to go to the tax office, which is about half an hour's drive away in Angoulême. That way I know it's done, I know the payment's gone to the right place, and I have a receipt. However, the tax office closes at 12 noon on the dot, and if you arrive 5 seconds late, they will not let you in. So I don't want to be late for that. The bonus of going to the tax office is also that not far away is our favourite MIUs. So if we've got time, we'll pop in there and see if we find anything good. But the really big job that I have to do today is to hoover the ceiling. But who knew that was a thing? And it was such a big job. But you'll see in the attic, the beams are just covered with what seems to be 100 years of dust, as well as all the mess left over from insulating and plastering between the beams. So there's no point painting all the walls and the floors and making them all nice and pristine if all that dust is just going to get blown into the wet paint and make a mess. So I'm going to have to just climb around all those beams and hoover up as much as possible of that dust before I can start painting. Once that's done, then I can get on with the first coat of paint. And like I said before, we are just painting the whole of the attic white for now to be an undercoat for anything else that we decide to do a bit later. So the first coat is diluted with 10% water because the plasterboard is so dry that it just sucks up the paint. If we put the paint on too thick, it just doesn't stick properly. So the paint also goes further by diluting it. So that's what we're going to do. However, it's not as satisfying when you do that first coat because it's kind of see-through. But by the time you get to the second and third coats, then it really starts to look fantastic. Now, yesterday I spoke to my mother-in-law and she reminded me that with all those rose hips that I featured in the episode about colours, I could be making nypon soppa. So nypon soppa is a traditional Swedish soup made from rose hips. And it's very sweet. It's served as a dessert or as an energy drink. And it's a bit like jam, but in a soup. So it has lots of really great health benefits. It's really rich in vitamin C, which is just what you need in the winter. And it has lots of other vitamins and minerals. It's fantastic because even in the north of Sweden, it's widely available even from wild rose hips. So it's something that you can forage for and cook up and get all that vitamin C you need to keep you going. For example, it's served at the Vasaloppet. So the Vasaloppet is the largest ski race in the world. It's like a marathon on skis. It's 90 kilometers of a cross-country course, and thousands of people do it each year. And all along the route they serve nyponsoppa and blåbärssoppa. So you can choose either blueberry soup or rosehip soup. So I think that's just what I'm going to need to keep me going with all that work to do in the attic. And finally, the other thing I need to do today is catch up with my neighbour Stefan. Now, Stefan is one of 2 people in the village who grows, distills and bottles their own cognac. And my mother-in-law has ordered 12 bottles of his VSOP to be sent to Sweden in time for Christmas. So I just need to check with him how much the postage is to Sweden, and then we can get that done. But first, I need to get up, get a coffee, and get on with the day. Today I wanted to talk to you a little bit about how to buy a chateau. Now, most of us Anglophones, or English-speaking people, or non-native French people, tend to think that any large house in France must be a chateau. However, this is not always the case. So what exactly is it that defines what a chateau is? Is it the architecture? Is it how many turrets or towers it has? Does it need to have a moat to be a chateau? Crenelated turrets? What is it that makes it a chateau? Well, the definition, according to this Bible of chateaus in the region, is that a chateau is determined by the person who once lived in it. In order for it to be a chateau, it needs to have had a lord who lived there. So it's the title given to the inhabitants that makes it a chateau. This means that in this region there are examples of chateaus that started out as humble farmhouses, but at some point the farmer did quite well and became favoured by the king and became ennobled. So it's the presence of a title. So a chateau, by definition, is any property that once was the residency of a title that was given by the king. So this means in effect that pretty much any property built after the revolution is no longer a chateau, because more or less there wasn't really any aristocracy after the revolution. Of course, I arrived 2 minutes late at the tax office and they would not let me in. There is no way French bureaucrats will work after 12. So what to do with the rest of my afternoon until everything I need to do is open again at 2 o'clock? Well, I have filled up on fuel, stopped in at the supermarket, at the petrol station, topped up on basic supplies, and it's still only 1 o'clock. If I go home, that's half an hour. Then I just, half an hour to come back out to the shops again. So I think I'll just head on down to Emmaus, and then I'll be there nice and early for when they open. There were some really interesting books in Emmaus today, but it was tempting, but I didn't buy them, but I filmed them. They were ledgers from the 1800s. Absolutely immaculate handwriting. It's so beautiful. And very, very detailed handwritten accounts, I think possibly of wine orders that were sent all around the world. It was listed as London, Brisbane, Paris, Bordeaux, lots of local towns obviously, but it was really impressive, and there were 2 of them. And then there was also a book of magazines published also in the 1800s, illustration magazines, and they were fascinating, and they had big pullouts, sometimes in colour, sometimes in black and white, including of Victor Hugo's funeral. Again, really interesting, beautiful, and very fascinating. Well, I got back to the house and now the sun's out. Typical. Time for a quick bite to eat. I'm having some avocado, which I adore. It's my favourite fast food. My mother was Californian, so and a cup of tea and an apple Danish. And then it's back to the grindstone. So rather than limiting yourself to the search term Chateau, my top tip would be to consider some of these other terms. Number 1 would be Demure, which means mansion in French. You could also search for Domaine, which means domain, and could include a chateau estate, but could be other types of estate as well. For example, it might include an écurie, which would be a horse breeding estate. And that would come with the stables and everything else required to breed horses. You might also like to consider the search term moulin, which would bring up mills, because we've seen some really beautiful mills in this region, and if you want access to water, that would be perfect. Obviously they're right next to the river. Some of you might like to consider a more spiritual search term, such as abbey, couvent, or cloître, which would be an abbey, a convent, or cloisters. Sometimes they become available for sale, and they can be really stunning properties. It's also worth considering the term manoir, which means manor, and that could be used interchangeably with logis, which means a lodging. And logis historically has been used interchangeably with the term chateau, because logis was also a property that belonged to someone with a title. So logis is worth considering. And one of my favourite terms in this region is maison de maître. Now, maison de maître is a bit like a manoir, or the manor house. It's the house of the boss, if you like. So it's quite often the largest house in the village. Another search term worth considering, especially if you're looking for a business, is hôtel, which seems kind of obvious. But again, in the past, hôtel was used interchangeably with the word château, particularly if it was a château in a town, and it might have been called an hôtel, even if it was a private property that wasn't rented out. Other terms include métairie, which is another term for farm, or ferme à cour fermée, which means a farm with a closed courtyard. And that could also be a maison de maître or a logis, and that's quite common in this area to have a courtyard on one side and a garden on the other side. In this region, we also have longère. Now, I know I often call our tobacco barn a longère because it's such a long barn, but technically it's actually a séchoir, or a drying barn. A longère is actually a farmhouse with a barn attached. So historically you would have had the barn next to your house, but the house was kind of in the barn. But those can be very grand, and it's a particular style of house that is also worth considering, and there's some really nice examples around in this region. Finally, the search terms you use may depend on your region. So, for example, if you're looking in Provence, then instead of using maison de maître or as well as, you might like to consider the term bastide, which, as far as I understand, is basically the same thing, but in Provence they call it bastide. There are probably more terms that I can't think of right now, so if you know of any more that I've not covered, please add them in the comments below, and I'll make a definitive list in the description to this video. There's plenty more that could still be said about buying property in France, but I'll leave it there for now. I hope you've enjoyed this episode. If you have any specific questions, please do leave them below and we'll do our best to answer them. If we don't know the answers, there's people we know we can ask to find out, maybe get them on the channel as well to interview them. But if you've enjoyed this and found it useful, please consider subscribing, give us a like, and hit that notification bell so you know when the next episode's up, because all of that really does help our channel to grow. Thank you so much for watching. Thank you for all your wonderful comments, and I look forward to reading them and answering your comments as we go forward. Bye for now.